So, as I said, we've got an action-packed agenda, and I am so pleased to let you know that first up we have the wonderful Professor Susan Orr, who is the Pro Vice Chancellor at De Montfort for Education. And Susan today is going to talk to us about the blended learning review, which she was charged with. It's a fantastic review. I won't share any more because I don't want to steal Susan's thunder. But Susan, I'm just going to stop sharing. And then it's over to you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me, Phil. It's lovely to be here and lovely to see all those messages coming into chat. So I'm going to jump in, talking about the OFS Blended Learning Review. The right place to start is a quote from the student. This is a short text from one of the students in my Blended Learning Review, and I just thought it sets the scene well. So here's the student. At the beginning of the year, when we went back in person, I think there was a real excitement and buzz about being in the room together. One of the things we've noticed, though, over the course of the year is that some of the students, especially the ones coming into first year, actually we don't know how to be in the room with each other, and we're needing more support because obviously they've come through this very weird school experience. Now, I think that sets the scene well for this blended learning review and when it happened. And what we do in the report is we give a definition of blended learning. And again, I'm very respectful of the huge expertise in this room. So, I know I'm talking to a body of experts here. But for the purposes of the OFS review, we decided to choose a definition of blended learning that put a lot of emphasis on the integration between the online and the in-person, or the online and in-campus. We'll get into the nomenclature in a bit. So we like definitions that emphasize the thoughtful integration, the purposeful, thoughtful integration of modes of study. Now, again, what occurred to me one day in the kitchen was I was thinking about the word blended in the kitchen mode, where you really picture something being properly mixed up. When I blend anything in my kitchen, at the end of it, you can't tell the different constituent bits. It's really mixed up together. And yet when we talk about blended learning, we can kind of talk about binaries and we can divide those things. So, in anywhere I've spoken about this report, I'm saying let's use the kitchen definition of blended, where we're doing a proper mixing together and we're reflecting on the ways that our students in practice experience the digital as an embroidered element of their education rather than a straightforward binary. So what did the review consist of? So this was an Office for Students review, and there were 4 panelists, and there were 6 anonymous providers, and some of you may be in this room. So very generous providers who agreed to let us meet with a range of colleagues and students in their institution. We looked at subjects: humanities, medicine, allied health, natural science, engineering, and performing arts. We did some desk-based research and followed that up with interviews with Pro Vice Chancellors, course leads, technology-enhanced learning leads, or indeed whatever they were called. And we met with students, of course. And when we met with students, the wonderful and impressive Office for Students student panel facilitated those meetings for us. So we listened in, but those were student-led meetings. So I'm just, in the short time I've got, just going to highlight a couple of points, a series of bullet points really about that review. So the first thing is, I keep using this phrase unapologetically, we are in an emergent context. We did the data collection in May of this year. At the beginning of that academic year, we didn't even know if we'd be fully back on campus. We didn't even know if we'd have social distancing. So it was an academic year of great uncertainty. And indeed, although students were back primarily to face-to-face teaching in the providers we were looking at, in those universities and colleges, some students were in lockdown in different countries. So this was a really emergent context. And I think we've got to accept the dynamic nature of this space. And for everybody we talked to, although we were interested in what was it like in May and what was it like going forward, they all wanted to talk to us about how it had been in lockdown. That was recent history for them, and they wanted to talk about it. And what was just so powerful to me was the long-term impact of a period of isolated study online in the pandemic and the profound effects that it had on our students. And what again came through in a very strong way was students telling us they wanted support building back peer networks and engaging with each other on campus. And so that's really part of our work. It's always been part of our work, but it's an imperative at this point. Now, the desk-based research was interesting. We got ourselves into the mode of thinking, okay, we're a student and we're wanting to apply to one of these universities, and we sort of thought about some courses we thought we wanted to apply for, and we looked to see what could we find out about the modalities of teaching on that course or at module level. We looked to see whether we could find information about, if we were very unconfident with our digital skills, could we, as an applicant, could we find that we would get good support for our skills development in that area? And generally, there was quite poor information on the site. And of course, one always looks at one's own sites in that situation. And actually, I think we've got a lot of work to do as a sector to make sure we've got high quality information for applicants before they enrol that makes them see very clearly the expectations they can have about modalities of learning. And I think this is the digital skill thing is important because obviously we did meet students who were unconfident with the digital in our sample. And again, it's just this reminder, we can get into this sort of lazy talk about the digital student who they all know everything and blah, blah, blah. And, in our study, we did come across students who, for example, really appreciated what some lecturers might think was a very plodding walk through the VLE, but actually there were some students who found that really, really helpful. So just reminding us not to generalize about students' confidence in digital spaces. So I would say to you, look at your own websites and imagine yourself to be a student who's unconfident with digital. What can I find out about where I would get help with that? Now, I want to talk about blend coherence. Most of the universities had very well articulated, very strong educational strategies, but decisions about the blend were primarily decided at more local levels. Now, I can understand the reasons for that. Haven't got time to go into them. I absolutely understand why that might be. And it gave module leaders a degree, autonomy to make decisions about the blend approach. But of course, what we found was the unintended consequence of that was that at course level, things could be incoherent and demands were being made on the students that didn't line up or align very well because there was no course level agreement around approaches to study. And, for example, in one context, well, in several contexts, there were courses where students were getting a lot of asynchronous lectures to watch and a on-campus timetable, and there was nobody kind of taking the overview of what would that timetable look like for that student on a weekly basis. So for an inclusion agenda, I think we've got to think at course level about what our students are doing on and off campus, on and offline. Now, we saw some beautiful examples. Now, it was an OFS study, so it was more about kind of compliance and the regulatory framework rather than good practice. But we did see some good practice, for example, where really careful course design had taken place where the courses were thinking about what would happen online before the students came on campus to prepare them for that on-campus engagement, and what carefully crafted work were they doing in the digital space after that on-campus engagement, maybe in a specialist lab space, etc., etc. So when we saw that designed well, it really sort of, it was very strong. Now, you can tell already I've got completely tangled in the language I'm using for blended learning, and the digital learning and teaching language is still very slippery. It's still a very dynamic space, and I know I myself get trapped in the binary of online and face-to-face, which as soon as I say it, I know it's a ridiculous binary. It doesn't work. I have lots of in-person meetings online, for example. And of course, again, going back to my embroidered metaphor, it doesn't reflect the ways that the digital is embroidered into the student experience. And I think this is not just semantics. It has implications in practice. So, for example, in our study, students often told us they needed high quality spaces on campus to engage with digital study. And if we just have this sort of lazy binary approach that we just think, oh, well, the online stuff's sort of somewhere else, we're not going to attend to the campus requirements for students who were telling us, you need to be thinking about this in your estate plans. Now, when I presented this work a few weeks ago, I had somebody from the Disabled Students Commission, Professor Jeff Layer, and it really helped me think about this work, putting the disabled students center stage. And we did, we had a student on our panel who was really helped keep us very focused on a disability agenda throughout this whole study. But what Jeff Layer said, and I thought it was a useful reminder, was that for disabled students, whilst they are a very diverse community, let's highlight that, they benefit from certainty, communication, consistency, and choice. I could have easily designed my recommendations under those headings. And I think it's just a reminder of how a sort of inclusion agenda has to sort of fold into any agenda of blended learning. And it was certainly one of the principles in the review. Now, one thing that came up a lot in the review, and there'll be activities about this in the room, is the hybrid learning, dual cast teaching. And in the study, with the students and with the staff that we interviewed, this was not viewed positively. It was not experienced well by students, or indeed the members of staff who were at different points adopting that model. So although there are probably brilliant cases of hybrid teaching and learning out there, I'm sure there are, I know there are, in our study it wasn't working yet. And so I think then if we're going to use hybridity or options about engaging online or face-to-face as an inclusion agenda, we need to be a bit careful around that, because we may be creating other problems in trying to address an inclusion issue. So then the people often say, what surprised me in this review? And the thing that surprised me was the students' strong preference for on-campus lectures. Now, again, it's a small sample, but that's what they told us. They liked the on-campus lectures. And of course, they wanted recordings they could engage with off-campus. And I tried to understand this, and I think one student sort of phrased it very well when I talked to her about it. And this is what she said about what an online lecture can feel like. Not seeing faces or hearing voices in person. Little things, colleagues walking to lectures and seeing other people to say hi. Little chats you get, meeting new people. Physical environment makes you stay in the moment, enjoying the back and forth, not having to look at your own face. I can relate to that one. And so our students in this sample valued the separation between home and university, and they associated the on-campus learning with increased motivation, and it was easier for them to engage with study. And the other thing that came through very strongly was they found they were getting less implicit feedback in online spaces. And what I mean by that in practical terms was, a student might find some content really, really difficult, and they thought they were the only person who thought that work was really difficult in a lecture. But when they were on campus, they could kind of read the room and think, oh, do you know what? Everybody's having a nightmare with this. It's not just me. So it's that sort of implicit feedback that students were getting less of online. And so I think obviously what that brings me back to is CPD for lecturers, inclusive digital pedagogic skills being part of the digital, part of the toolkit for our lecturers. So I've just got a few sort of takeaway points before I finish. Now, I suspect it won't surprise anybody in this room that we find that the quality of teaching, which of course the OFS were interested in, the quality of teaching is not dependent on the modality. You can have high quality teaching in an online space. You can have low quality teaching in an online space. And the same applies to on campus. And so whilst that may seem unremarkable, if you think about when this study was commissioned and the kind of media, it was the whole thing about value for money and digital learning, and the sort of students weren't coming back on campus, and all of the sort of media sort of weaponizing of digital learning at that point. I think it is an important point to assert, and it was a clear finding from our report. And the other thing I want to say is what we have to make sure that we don't forget how important it is to look at enhancement of teaching that is face-to-face on campus. We could be so focused on enhancing the digital. Well, blended is more than one thing. There's still lots to learn, and there's still lots of pedagogic inquiry about a face-to-face encounter, in a live space, residence mode, if you like. So we've got to look at the totality, going back to my sort of integration point. So our students were saying they wanted us to think more about how the online and the face-to-face integrated at course level. That was a clear point, a clear finding in this. And I'm really interested in course design and the different people we need to get around the table for high quality course design that goes beyond just the course team and brings in the learning instructors, the technology enhanced learning teams, etc., etc. So I believe that we're really well positioned to move forward, to develop well-considered blended learning. And we may not even call it blended learning. Already that's quite a problematic phrase, and I accept that. We're more likely, obviously, to be referring to digitally enhanced learning and teaching, and the post-digital university, etc., etc. But I think we're in a good place. And I think whilst there has been a massive focus on getting our students back on campus primarily for well-being, for community building, to just give students those socialisation opportunities that they've so missed, and the sort of societies, sports, etc., etc., what we are perfectly placed to think about the role of the digital in a university degree. And I think I've said everything. Thank you very much.